Russia has no intention of stopping its war against Ukraine and will continue to push for its objectives, with blood, force, threats, and blackmail. Every day, Moscow confirms this with shelling and the killing of civilians. And to foreign ambassadors, Putin cynically stated that the Russian Federation will continue to pursue all the goals of the so-called special military operation. During the presentation of credentials at the Kremlin, the dictator spoke at length about a just security architecture in Europe. However, he immediately emphasized that it should be built, and I quote, taking into account Russia's legitimate demands. In other words, after unleashing a bloody war, Putin once again demanded that the world recognize his right to seize other people's territories and impose his own rules. As for the constant delays in signing the peace plan, the head of the Kremlin, of course, blamed Kyiv and, I quote, certain countries that do not abide by international law. By the way, that's very telling. All these ultimatums prompted a response from the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee. They stated that no one can put pressure on Ukraine, which is heroically resisting aggression, and that Putin should not achieve through negotiations what he failed to achieve on the battlefield.
Vladimir Putin feels no remorse. He has always been and remains a KGB agent. He is a dictator with blood on his hands for decades. He is the biggest thief in world history, a war criminal who should be behind bars right now. And of course, Putin is a liar. When Vladimir Putin smiles at American negotiators, he acts like he's our friend, and he behaves as if we actually believe he's our friend. We have no reason to smile back at Putin. He should be treated with caution and contempt. Roger Wicker, chairman of the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee.
These words from influential Republican Senator Roger Wicker were also directed at the President of the United States. This week, Donald Trump told Reuters in an interview that the Russian dictator Putin is supposedly ready to end the war and sign an agreement, while Ukraine wants this less. In response, by the way, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk also reminded everyone that it was Moscow that rejected this document, putting forward deliberately impossible conditions and doing everything possible to stall the peace process. Putin's negotiators acted in exactly the same way during the talks in Istanbul. They refused to even discuss a temporary ceasefire. And all they suggested was to create groups and messengers to fate progress in the negotiations.
It was Russia, not Zelenskyy, that rejected the peace plan prepared by the United States. Russia's only response was new missile strikes on Ukrainian cities. That's why the only solution is to increase pressure on Russia. Donald Tusk, Prime Minister of Poland, on social network X.
Ukraine has never been and will never be an obstacle to peace, and the massive Russian strikes are proof that the Kremlin does not want any agreements. Vladimir Zelenskyy stated this during his evening address. This is how the president of Ukraine responded to criticism from the United States. According to the head of state, it is the daily Russian terror that proves who is really disrupting any attempts.
Ukraine has never been and will never be an obstacle to peace. It is the Russian missiles, Russian Shaheds, and Russian attempts to destroy Ukraine that are clear evidence that Russia is not interested in any agreements at all. When, because of Russia, Ukrainians are left without electricity for 20 to 30 hours, and when Russian strikes are aimed at breaking our energy system and our people, it is Russia that must be pressured.
Since the beginning of the heating season, Russia has carried out 256 strikes with missiles and drones on Ukrainian energy facilities and the heating system. As stated by the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, such attacks are a consistent policy aimed at destroying the Ukrainian people. The highest number of combined strikes has been recorded in the capital, as well as in the Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy, Mykolaiv, and Chernihiv regions. Journalists from the reputable publication The New York Times emphasize that all these attacks have no military purpose and are aimed solely at intimidating people. This is also part of the Kremlin's strategy to use cold as a weapon of war.
For years, the Kremlin has tried to freeze Ukraine and force it to submit. This winter, its attacks have become the most destructive in history. As Kiev plunged into a deep winter freeze, Russia intensified its campaign to disable the city's heating and power systems. The goal of these attacks is to undermine the morale of the population and put pressure on the government to make concessions in peace talks organized by the Trump administration. From a publication by the New York Times.
Institute for the Study of War, they believe that the Oreshnik missile strike on western Ukraine was also part of Russia's strategy to disrupt peace initiatives. The main goal pursued by the Kremlin was to intimidate European countries and the U.S. and to cut off further aid to Ukraine. Let us recall that on January 6th in Paris, the member countries of the Coalition of Willing States signed the Declaration on Security Guarantees for Ukraine. The document provides for monitoring of a possible ceasefire under the leadership of the United States, long-term defense support for Kyiv, and the preparation of legally binding agreements in case of renewed Russian aggression.
The Kremlin has repeatedly stated that such Western security guarantees would be unacceptable for Russia, and that foreign troops would be considered legitimate targets for Russian forces. The missile in use is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, and the deployment of a multiple warhead missile over western Ukraine was likely intended to intimidate the coalition of the willing and deter the deployment of such troops. At the same time, it was assumed that these forces would be stationed in western Ukraine and operate far from the front line. From a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
By the way, the United Kingdom did not support the proposal from France and Italy to resume negotiations with Moscow under Putin's leadership. London stated that the Kremlin has not taken a single step that would indicate a genuine desire for peace. And under these circumstances, according to the British Foreign Office, international pressure on Moscow should not weaken, but on the contrary, should intensify.
We see a tremendous commitment to the cause, which Ukraine is pursuing together with the United States and with the support of Europe, developing plans for a peaceful settlement, including security guarantees. But so far, I don't see any signs that Putin is ready to come to the negotiating table and start discussions. In the absence of such evidence, pressure on Moscow should not weaken, but rather intensify through sanctions and military support for Kyiv. Yvette Cooper, UK Foreign Secretary, in an interview with Politico.
All the latest statements and actions from the Kremlin show that Russia is not ready for peace and is using negotiation rhetoric as a cover to continue the war. Missile terror, attacks on energy infrastructure, and ultimatums. These only confirm to partners that Moscow's goal is not compromise, but a war of attrition. The path to peace, as before, does not lie through concessions to the dictator, but through deterring aggression and supporting Ukraine. And as our partners emphasize, there simply are no other alternatives today.